Hello and welcome to the ASB Investment Podcast, the show that keeps you up to date on the markets and helps you make smart choices with your investments. These are entirely our own views and that of our guests. It's not investment advice, but we know plenty of experts at ASB that will be happy to chat if you need. Well, welcome back to another episode of the ASB Investment Podcast. I'm your host, Nigel Grant, and today we're diving into the world of infrastructure. It's a topic that you'll have heard a fair bit about recently in the media and politics, what NZ and the world is or isn't getting done in this area, and so on. But it's broader than that. It's what we use every day to get from A to B. It's how we get stuff done. That package that arrives on your front doorstep from online shopping just doesn't arrive there by magic. There's a massive network of interconnected ports, roads, rail, and depots that connect things and get it from A to B. So to help us learn a bit more about this, we have the pleasure of welcoming two new guests to the show. Will Thomson from Global Infrastructure Partners and our very own, being ASB, Matt Dobbs, Head of Infrastructure at ASB. Gentlemen, welcome. How are you both today?
Very well.
Very well, Nigel. Thanks for having us.
You're welcome. And just because you're both new to the show, can you provide a bit of an elevator pitch as such? What is specific about your roles and a snapshot of what a typical day in the life of Will and Matt looks like? Will, we'll start with you first.
Well, thanks, Nigel. Wonderful to be here. So I work for Global Infrastructure Partners. Let's call that GIP because it's a bit easier to remember.
Sure.
Which was recently acquired by BlackRock. And you know what I do there is invest in infrastructure in the Asia Pacific region. I'm also the head of the New Zealand office. And yeah, that's me.
And what did you do before your current role?
So I spent about the last 4 years working at Jarden, co-leading their private capital investment activity in New Zealand. And prior to that, I spent about 8 years in London and Sydney working at GIP.
Okay. And Matt, a quick snapshot on you and your role for ASB as well.
Yeah, sure. So I joined ASB in October last year as head of infrastructure.
Ooh, new.
There we go. New to the brand. Joined with a pretty broad mandate really to support investment into the infrastructure sector. So particularly that new investment that we're also keen to see. Prior to that, spent a lot of time overseas developing and financing in the sector. So nice to be back doing that on home soil.
And you were in London as well?
I was in London.
So do you guys know each other?
We've crossed paths, similar connections, but quite different parts of the market.
Oh, okay. Well, welcome. I'm glad that we could get you back together on this couch here together. And any well-known infrastructure projects that you'd been involved with in your time?
Recently,
that you can talk about?
Yeah, look, we funded Harmony and Claris's Tohei Solar Farm recently. So that was a really, really great renewable asset that's coming through the system in New Zealand. So keen to do a lot more of those. Now,
for our listeners who might be unfamiliar, let's dive into the basics, I guess. What do we mean by infrastructure? Matt, to you first. When we talk about infrastructure, what do we mean by that? And what are some examples of kind of what is classed as an infrastructure asset?
Yeah, sure. So I guess you touched on some of the traditional asset classes, the ports, the airports, the pipes and the wires. But it really extends out to some of those new things that we're seeing today. So data centers, a lot in the energy transition space. So renewables, EV charging, all sorts of things really that can be covered. So quite wide ranging, but it really distills down to some common characteristics. Tends to have a high upfront cost. We tend to be talking about real assets, so things that you can see and touch and feel, albeit there's a few exceptions to that. And they tend to have a sort of a long-term investment profile with some defensive characteristics. So whether it's maybe some regulatory protection or some other really high barriers to entry that just preserve that value and enable investors to look at them in a slightly different way to your general corporate.
And when we talk about infrastructure kind of as an asset class, Matt's described sort of those, I guess, the classic characteristics. When you're looking at it from an investment perspective, whether you or like a portfolio manager does, what do you or did they look for typically?
Yeah, well, I think, look, what we look for is high quality infrastructure assets. But when investors pick GIP to manage a part of their portfolio, I think really what they're looking at is some of the benefits that infrastructure has as an asset class as part of that portfolio. And historically, infrastructure has provided pretty stable returns and pretty stable yield. Obviously, the past is not a guarantee of the future.
Of good caveat.
Good caveat.
Yeah.
But what you tend to see is a low correlation to other asset classes. Generally inflation protection with the assets, which is something that a lot of investors look for, and finally, diversification benefits in a well sort of managed portfolio.
And when you say that low correlation to other asset classes. What, just in case there's anyone out there who doesn't know what that means, what do you mean by that?
It's really, I mean, in sort of plain English, it's how whether returns sort of sync up with each other. So take, for example, if we had a large market drawdown across the public markets, an infrastructure asset that was less correlated to that would either not have a drawdown or would have less of a drawdown.
Sure. Okay. And well, we've talked, I guess, about, from an asset class perspective, but obviously some of the things we've talked about as well have a benefit to not just investors, but society. Okay. I need that parcel to turn up. I don't know why I'm going to keep using that example, but I guess it's just a pretty common one. How can investing in infrastructure have a positive impact on society as well?
I mean, the key thing about infrastructure, some of the points that you raised, Nigel, and that Matt's talked about, they're all assets, they're all services, they're all things that drive everyday life, whether that's the water that we drink or the roads that we drive on or the data centers that provide the cloud computing that we need. And so investing in that sector drives economic growth and helps improves the quality of life. It creates jobs. A good example might be a project we're working on at the moment in Australia, where we're spending approximately $1 billion building, at the time, one of the world's largest batteries on the site of an old coal-fired power station. And so that battery is very large, obviously, but it's also going to provide for a huge amount of renewables to be built in that part of Australia, because it's going to smooth the generation profile of that intermittent renewables to match the demand that comes from houses, from industry, from commercial users.
And I guess when I think of the term sort of societal good, or it's not just about sort of climate type infrastructure or helping with the transition. There's actually just basic things about helping us be more productive and get from A to B. Does anyone want to, I guess there's other societal benefits than just climate transition, right?
Absolutely right. I mean, infrastructure is across the entire spectrum.
Do we take it for granted?
I don't take it for granted because I work for an infrastructure manager, but I think, it is easy to forget sometimes as society that infrastructure is important, right? And you have seen that a little bit across parts of the world, that the developed world, that infrastructure has been neglected.
Yeah, right.
That's part of what we can come to talk about is a challenge to finance the upgrading of infrastructure.
It's just the more we talk, it's just so critical. Yet it just feels like it's not getting potentially as much of a focus as it should. So speaking of that, from ASB's perspective, Matt, what role do you see us, I guess, or the wider bank playing in NZ in the current market, and particularly when it comes to helping finance projects like these?
Yeah, sure. Look, I guess we're focused really on a lot of that new investment that we need at the moment, and in that context, it's quite a different conversation when you're speaking to an investor and you're pointing at a blank field and some technical drawings and some contracts, as opposed to what a lot of traditional investment looks for, which is proven value and proven performance. So I guess at ASB we have some of that specialism that sits next to the various stakeholders around those transactions, helps navigate those conversations, structuring up those assets and ultimately to sort of raise the capital that's needed to take them forward. So we've struggled recently in terms of just getting that conversion in the New Zealand market. A lot of great effort going in from a lot of stakeholders, but we need more of it to get through to that shovels in the ground stage and see that progress and value come through.
And if I can, why is that conversion not as strong here than maybe you've seen in other parts, or you've both seen other parts around the world?
Yeah, look, I think we'll sort of come on to the capability piece, which is really a big theme in the conversation at the moment. A lot of what we see and use today was built some years ago on a large balance sheet, be it government and privatised or otherwise. And we've lost some of that capability that sort of brings all of those specialisms and stakeholders together. So if you think about any sort of large construction project, there's always some engineers, there needs to be some lawyers involved, some good commercial nous around the whole picture, and particularly for infrastructure, because it's got a specialist use, you might need to have a real sort of deep understanding of the market and the services that it's going to provide. So I think just bringing those that combination of capabilities together and as a bit of an art, and perhaps we've lost our way a little bit in that sense.
And so speaking of that, I guess from your perspective, Matt, coming home, what's your kind of update on infrastructure generally in New Zealand? Like, how does investment in it work? Any key trends or concerns? I mean, you've just touched on it a little bit, but any concerns or key trends you're seeing?
Yeah, sure. I guess how investment or infrastructure investment works, it depends on your perspective, really. I think we'd say historically a lot of the investment or a lot of that heavy lifting has been done by government. And we're now at a stage where we've got this huge wall of investment that's required to uplift some of those services and assets. And the government's not going to be able to do it all on their own. So that's really good in the sense that it's prompting some more meaningful discussions around how we partner to bring those assets forward. And so we've seen recent investment conference, things like that, which is going to pull some of those some of that critical expertise together around the opportunity.
And Will, anything to add on that in terms of like from an investor's standpoint? Any things that you've observed since coming to your current role in NZ from an infrastructure perspective?
Well, I think Matt, picks up all the right points there. And I mean, the one that maybe I'd just double click on or highlight is it's we hear a lot about capital being required, and that is obviously important, whether that's domestic or local or foreign capital. Sorry, but I think the skills piece is equally as important, and it's really important to remember that the skills and experience. When you look across society and the economy in New Zealand, we're not afraid to bring foreign experience and best practice in many areas of what we do. So just think, for example, of all the tech products that you use in everyday life. And there's no reason why infrastructure shouldn't be any different, particularly given it's the backbone of our economy.
And whoever wants to take it, a quick question was, you talked about kind of this, skills as being critical. Do we have those skills here, or have they over the years gone somewhere else? I mean, we've got two of the best here sitting in front of us, but is everyone else going overseas, or are we bringing people back?
Look, I think we've got some really great capability in New Zealand, and importantly, it's capability that understands some of the nuances of the New Zealand market. We have some unique challenges out here, so we can't just lift and shift from offshore, but we need to bolster the domestic sort of ability and really leverage some of that learning that's gone on in some sectors which we're more of a follower in, and naturally so. Yeah,
look, I'd agree 100% with Matt. I mean, there's lots of great people in New Zealand. There's lots of great Kiwis living overseas as well, bringing experience back home. But it's often not so much the people. It's like the institutional knowledge that comes with, for example, whether it's, building a new tunnel or something. The projects are so sort of, or have been historically reasonably sporadic, and so it's hard to build that institutional knowledge locally, right? So you need someone, a contractor to come from overseas who's been doing that day in, day out.
If there's a gun infrastructure person or company, they're probably going to, in the past, if there's not been that sort of natural, just there's projects lining up, they might go somewhere else, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's the world is awash with opportunities, right?
Yeah, in little old New Zealand. So, Matt, when we caught up a couple of weeks ago, I lasered in on something you told me then, which was you, in the past, had made the point that there's sort of been a gap between ideas and shovels in the ground in NZ, compared to other areas you'd worked in or what you observed. Why do you think that's been the case historically?
Look, I think there's probably been we probably haven't helped ourselves with a reasonably short political cycle. That's obviously one of the topics of conversation at the moment. So, the toing and froing between how some of that limited capital can and should be spent. So I think a little bit more consistency is obviously helpful. It helps businesses to invest in the capability as well. It helps them to retain it. We talked about losing people offshore. Really, it is a global market that we're existing in. We have to be mindful of that. I think for investors and just individuals, the chance to deploy that skill set into exciting projects is a real draw card, irrespective of where they're living currently. So the more that we can provide that opportunity and bring, motivate, I guess, those individuals to stay on the ground and delivering is pretty key.
And Matt, you spoke before about sort of typically the government's been the lead, but Will, a question for you is with the need for that kind of increased investment required to upgrade all our bits and pieces. What's the role of private investors now versus maybe what it was historically when it was all the government?
Yeah, I mean, I think historically, and this is not a New Zealand trend globally, we've seen it everywhere. Historically, infrastructure has been funded publicly, i.e. by the government. The majority of it, and a minority has been funded by private capital. I think now we're seeing, the scale of what's required to be built, whether that's growing economies, with growing populations needing new infrastructure, or developed economies with declining populations. So, needing to maintain infrastructure with a lower taxable, population base, having funding challenges there. What we're seeing across the world is an increasing need for private capital to get involved and help solve that challenge for governments, but also for corporations as well. Many corporations, for example, technology companies that have got huge capital requirements, in terms of what's required around data center build for the cloud and the AI boom. So we're seeing that across the world, like an increasing need for private capital and infrastructure to support governments and corporations. And I think at the moment, the private market asset class of infrastructure is about $1 trillion US globally, and we think that's probably going to be one of the fastest growing areas of private markets.
So, Will, what are the global trends kind of driving infrastructure investing? And I know in the past, listeners will understand that BlackRock have the mega forces. So I think a lot of them probably flow through into what you might answer this question with, right? Is that correct? Are the mega forces driving infrastructure as well?
Absolutely. I mean, GIP, as I mentioned at the start, or maybe you mentioned, we're now owned by BlackRock. But I think also what I've discovered in my short period of the common ownership is that, we have a lot of similar, we have a lot of alignment around how we view the world of the opportunity and infrastructure in particular. And so BlackRock has these 5 mega forces that are going to be driving infrastructure investing, and I think they are quite illustrative of areas we're focusing as well. So they sort of talk about the first one, no surprise to anyone, is the digital future. So the dramatic increase in cloud computing that we're seeing and artificial intelligence is going to drive, and hopefully your listeners would have seen some reference to this in the media, huge investment in data centers globally. That's kind of the tip of the iceberg. Obviously, these data centers consume an enormous amount of power, so you need a lot of energy generation, electricity generation. Generally, that's renewables as the kind of marginal new source of generation in a lot of markets globally. And also the grid transmission infrastructure to get that electricity to the data centers to do the work that, to run all of our digital things in life. The second one is demographics. I kind of touched on this before, but, we are seeing in developing countries continued population growth, which obviously with those countries growing as well as, becoming wealthier, there's a demand for infrastructure. The types of things that we're used to here in New Zealand are not common in a lot of developing world, and everybody wants, quite rightly, to have access to those types of services, and so that requires huge infrastructure build. You're also seeing a different thing in developed economies where, you've got a declining population, but you've got assets that need to be, as Matt's referred to before, that need to be upgraded, and so you've got a declining population, which drives a reducing kind of taxable base of residents that can fund, what's needed to upgrade the existing infrastructure. So that's an area where, we're seeing plenty of opportunity. The third one is changing supply chains. So with all the geopolitical challenges in the world at the moment,
just a few,
we're seeing a number of opportunities globally to, for companies or for governments, moving around their supply chains, and that obviously requires new or movements in infrastructure ownership. The fourth one is a transition to a low carbon economy. Again, probably no surprise to anyone, but whether that's government mandated or whether that's consumer preferences or whether that's investment preferences, given the risks, there's a huge demand. There has been for many years, but we only see that growing in terms of continuing to build out renewable energy assets. And the final one is urbanization. By 2050, I think BlackRock forecasts that 70% of the world's going to be living in a city. Obviously, living in a city generally requires more infrastructure than living in the rural community. So again, that's going to drive a huge amount of domestic infrastructure.
And I hadn't, just live blogging now in terms of my own thought process, but I've heard as listeners will know, I've heard the megaforces a few times on this podcast, but only when we've had this, I guess, infrastructure lens on it that you sort of go, I think of kind of that first companies that are involved in those themes, right? Like I always think of retirement villages for changing demographics, but actually infrastructure is woven all the way through. So no wonder it's a in vogue asset class. Matt, in terms of, do you have any thoughts on those mega forces, or is it just a case of basically I agree with everything that was said?
I agree with everything that was said. I think that sums it up. I mean, I remember studying Porter's 5 forces. I think we should add Will's 5 forces to it. It's kind of the next theme, really. So,
well, I'm sure. The GIP team will be more than comfortable if we rename it. In terms of your thoughts since coming back, is there any of the 5 that stand out as kind of one that NZ needs to, or like either an opportunity that we should lean into of the 5, or one that we're most deficient in?
Slightly different take on that. I think it's about adapting some of those global frames of reference into the New Zealand setting. So we're a slightly smaller market. We're out in the South Pacific. We have to deal with a few of those, or adapt to some of those nuances as well. So decentralisation has always been a big theme around, and we can see that in the energy system right now. The ability to introduce new technology quite quickly across the network. So talking about solar and things like that is going to change the way these systems operate and provide some greater chances for efficiency as well. So I think I think there's a lot to play for.
You just want to be working in infrastructure right now. It seems like there's a pretty good opportunity. And so to Matt, to you again, in terms of, and it's probably Will after that if you've got any thoughts, you've both worked in much bigger swimming pools as such. Come back to NZ. What can we learn from, I guess, infrastructure in those other markets? How have they done it or approached it? I guess big challenges, and what could we adopt or avoid?
Yeah, look, I guess speaking to those differences, so capital and capability just connects a whole lot easier, and some of that's down to where developed countries sit in the world, so closer proximity to supply chains, bigger populations, deeper pockets, greater specialism. It all helps. But if I look back to time overseas, it was also a really competitive market. So it really drove that constant innovation, learning from the last transaction. We had this old adage, you're only as good as your last one. And it was really about how are you grabbing hold of somebody who's done this before, so that you're not starting from a blank sheet, and you're learning from those lessons and I guess continuing to evolve. So I think we hear that in New Zealand's pipeline conversation. We hear that sort of mindset now around how do we not just present one-off opportunities to investors, but that consistency of flow that enables the sort of investment, not just in the infrastructure, but in the professional infrastructure that's required.
The infrastructure for the infrastructure.
Correct.
Yeah, I guess you are what your record says it is. Any thought, I guess, before we get into the last question, any thoughts from you in terms of, what you think New Zealand can adopt from those bigger markets?
Look, I think a lot of the things that are being done at the moment are really encouraging.
The right steps.
The right steps, as Matt talked about. The opening of the arms to foreign experience and foreign capital. The opening up of permitting challenges that they've been there historically. To really encourage investment that is needed quickly in certain sectors, right, like the transition or digital, or data centres. Building out that pipeline of work that is often talked about, and where possible, getting bipartisan support for that, so we don't, change every 3 or 4 years.
And to the final kind of question, I guess avid listeners will know, and if they follow the news, that there was a recent infrastructure investment summit in Auckland, and ASB and GIP were both represented there. As a final kind of question, Will, to you first, what's the summit? What was it all about, and why is it important for investors and New Zealand? We'll go to Matt after that.
Well, look, it was a forum that was, held by the government to showcase opportunities to invest in New Zealand infrastructure. And so GIP was honoured to attend that, along with a number of other, domestic institutions like yourselves and ones from offshore as well. And I think, the key message I'd leave your listeners with is that, like the government, we, as one of the largest investors in infrastructure globally, really do see New Zealand as an attractive global destination to invest in infrastructure. And so, I think, look, there's a lot that will play out over the coming months out of that summit, but it's a fantastic first step.
It's a hell of an elevator pitch. Matt, what are your thoughts in terms of
Look, similarly for ASB, I think it's a really positive step. Nice to see, I guess, some headlines coming out around what that future pipeline looks like. Nice to see those connections forming with both the investor capability, but also the specialist constructors, that specialist engineering and tunnelling capability that we'll need for a few of these projects. So, look, I mean, there's a lot of work still to do, but it's a nice reset. It's nice to see that momentum, and I'm sure we'll continue to see some a bit more press on that one over the next week or so.
I really like the infrastructure for the infrastructure. I'm going to keep using that. I'm going to pretend that was my line, and I'm going to keep using it. So we go to the last question now. It's the one I ask all of our guests. It's the what are you currently reading or watching or listening to that you could recommend? So Will, you're up first. Your recommendation, please.
Am I allowed two?
You can.
I can have two, great. Yeah. So we've talked a bit about AI today. That's obviously going to be a defining kind of technology of our time. So I'm trying to keep on top of that as much as I can. I read a weekly newsletter by a gentleman called Azim Azhar. It's called Exponential View. It's fascinating in terms of keeping up to date with what is rapidly moving technology. The second thing that's obviously front of mind for a lot of people in the world at the moment is, and certainly myself, just as someone who's lived internationally, is geopolitics. So I listen to on the Financial Times the Ruckman Review, which is the chief foreign affairs correspondent, Gideon Ruckman, interviews lots of interesting people around the world. And if there's another podcast I could suggest, suggest your listeners listen to, it's the Ruckman Review.
Oh, okay, well that's a great recommendation. And Matt, what is your item?
Yeah. Look, I mean, my TV and podcast choices are far too embarrassing to mention, I think. But,
it doesn't have to be business or smart stuff related.
Look, I mean, being a massive infrastructure geek, I mean, there's a great book that I'd recommend, which is How Big Things Get Done.
Yes. Do you remember who by?
Oh, it's a Danish author and an American. So it's Flubier
the title will get you.
Put it this way. The title's the best Google search. Forgive the pronunciation on that one.
It was good.
But a great sort of insight in terms of the trials and tribulations of infrastructure and some of those lessons that we want to, or some of those pitfalls that we want to avoid. So strong recommendation from me.
And just so you know, next time you're both on there, you can go embarrassing stuff. Like we've had maths before, Married at First Sight. I talk about gardening all the time.
No comment. No.
Okay. All right. All right. Leave that unspoken. But you can do it next time. My one this episode was and listeners will know the reading habits of the host in terms of being also a geek for all things business and markets related. I did the 14th, but the 15th annual JP Morgan Energy paper by my favourite author, Michael Sembelis. So speaking of infrastructure, it was over 50 pages of energy charts, stats and facts. And I got the chance to read it during my daughter's ballet competition, which I had a lot of downtime for. So I looked very intelligent there, reading just stacks of charts and stuff. But it is a pragmatist's view of the energy transition, and I would encourage the niche members of our audience to read it. So with that, thank you again for your time and expertise today, guys. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. I feel like this is going to be a topic that it's only going to be more and more important. So we will get you both back on the show at a later date to check in on the progress NZ is making. And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in again to the show. We hope you found this discussion interesting. As you can see, there's a lot going on in the infrastructure environment at the moment. So join us and listen as we bring you the best in the business to guide you through it. So until then, it's happy investing, and it's bye for now. Thanks for listening to the ASB Investment Podcast. If you have any thoughts on this episode, or if there's anything you'd like us to discuss on a future show, get in touch with us at podcasts@asb.co.nz.